I have lived here in Central Florida for the last 45 of my nearly 50 years on this earth. So I've experienced more than my fair share of hurricanes. And I was fascinated with hurricanes as a child. My father taught me how to use the paper tracking maps and listen to the news and mark the path of the hurricane. And he'd often do his own predictions of the track that the hurricane would take. And it fascinated me, especially because over and over again, he'd be right. That's the thing with hurricanes. You can see them coming and you have time to plan, you have time to prepare, you have time to make yourself and your family safe. And the beautiful thing is that often a community will come together to help keep each other safe. Last week, when Hurricane Helene was still raging in the Gulf, the news showed that people were already lining up to get sandbags for their homes. But what heartened me the most was the story about a group of people who went early to the sandbag location. They were there to bag sand for those in the community who couldn't. You see, most of the time, you have to fill your own sandbags at these locations, and some people are just not in a position to do this, sometimes due to mobility issues, and sometimes due to not having the resources to get to the location and transport bags back home, and sometimes just due to work commitments. So, to see a group of people willing to help their neighbors in a time of impending crisis, it was a beautiful thing. Because here's the thing, filling sandbags, that's a two-person job. You can't do that alone. It takes one person to hold the bag in a certain way, and it takes the other person to shovel the sand into the bag. They have to work together. The work can't be done quickly. If you work too fast, you spill the sand. No, filling sandbags is done methodically, slowly, almost meditatively. And it requires people working in conjunction, in community, to create the items that will help create a safe barrier against the water that threatens to come in and destroy a home. That's what sandbags are for, after all. They don't create a full stop wall to prevent water from coming in. Their purpose is to redirect as much of the moving water as they can, to build a wall, a barrier against the swiftly moving water that we have seen cause so much damage. Now, we didn't do a lot of sandbags during storms growing up. We were lucky. Our home was up a bit higher, high enough to keep us safe. And as my father used to say, at the point the water reached our house, we needed to worry about our neighbors, not just our own home. So, to protect resources for those who really needed them, we didn't use sandbags. Now, we were privileged. We were lucky. We were blessed with good land placement and decent home construction, things that we actually had nothing to do with. It was simply a privilege that we enjoyed. Now, sometimes if the wind was high enough, he would go buy bags of playground sand and lean them against the sliding glass doors. But he never went to get the free sandbags because we didn't need them. And he told me that that would keep them available for those who did. That's the lesson that my father taught me in all of his talks of tracking hurricanes. Not just how to pinpoint the storm's location on the map, not how to stock up on supplies, not how to hunker down and stay safe. Now, the lesson my father taught me around hurricanes was how we take care of one another. You see, my family has lived in the same neighborhood since 1979, and we have some of the same neighbors we've had since that time. So they all look after one another, especially in the days leading up to the storm. And it's more than just checking in and making sure that each home has supplies. In 2004, we were impacted by four storms, one right after the other. And I'm sure if you lived here during that time, you remember. It felt relentless. It felt like it would never end. We were in a state of heightened awareness and preparedness for the entire hurricane season. I always kept a bag packed in case I needed to evacuate. But that was another lesson. We did not need to run from water, so we did not need to evacuate. If we left when we didn't need to, we'd be taking up space on the roads from someone who really did need the safety provided from the evacuation. Now, I moved home for a period of time during that season, and I woke up one morning to the day before yet another storm was inbound to the sound of chainsaws. My father had rallied a few of the other neighbors, and mostly men who are retired and bored, and they were going around the neighborhood and trimming trees. Now, the city had already stated they would not come to pick up the lawn waste that was supposed to have been picked up the day before. So many of our neighbors had debris in their yards that would turn into missiles when the storm hit. One of the neighbors had a large enclosed trailer, so they went around the neighborhood and just picked up all the debris and stored it. They went door to door asking neighbors if they had any trees they needed trimmed. And I remember only one neighbor didn't think their tree needed to be trimmed. But later that day, the storm hit. My dad stood in the doorway as the storm crossed over. And I asked him what he was doing because it sure didn't seem safe to me, although it really seemed cool. He told me, I'm standing in the gap, bearing witness. There are four of us doing this so that we can get an idea of who will need help. Hours later, the eye began to pass over us. And my dad was out the door in an instant, my mother screaming after him to stay inside. His team walked the neighborhood, going door to door and checking on everyone. The house where they didn't trim the tree split in two and hit both houses. They didn't have much time to do anything about it, but they assessed and returned home and made a plan. My father, who saved everything, found extra shingles in the workshop. As soon as the storm was completely over, he and his team met up again. Each of them had brought things to help. Someone had plywood, someone had another handful of shingles, someone had nails, someone had a bit of tar paper. Was the roof up to code when they were done? Absolutely not. But as my father explained to me, it was a stopgap measure to stop the damage from getting worse before the insurance adjusters could arrive. These were the lessons I learned from him during a hurricane. He always told me that we were relatively safe. We might get some water in the house, but we wouldn't flood. Our trees were far enough away from the house that even if they fell, we should be okay. Our power might go out, but we would survive. And because of those privileges, our job was to help others, to check on our friends and neighbors and help as needed, to anticipate the needs others may have and fill them if we could. And if we couldn't, well, that's why we rely on our neighborhood, our community. Together, we could all help. Now, growing up in Florida, I do not have a lot of experience with road salt. I knew what it was. I'd seen some TV shows and the movies that talk about it, and I understood the purpose and how it works. But it wasn't until I spent Januaries in Chicago for seminary that I fully experienced it. Now, here's the interesting thing, to me at least, about road salt. You can't really see it. I mean, I suppose when you're around it regularly, you can see it, but not like how you can see sandbags against a door. To me, though, that's the interesting thing. I learned while walking around in Chicago to look for the sparkle of road salt. It was subtle, but seeing that sparkle told me that the sidewalk would be safe to walk on. And if I didn't see the sparkle, I should be extra cautious when walking on the snow and slush. Now, I didn't figure that out by myself. I was lucky to have friends who lived up north who taught this little Florida girl how to stay safe and not end up on my rear end. Because just because the snow was melting did not mean that the walkway was safe. Ice in Chicago was insidious. It could be lurking anywhere, even under what looked like a simple and non-threatening puddle. It took someone who knew the lay of the land, quite literally, to point out to me where the dangers were, and then how to detect them myself. I learned to watch, to move slower, to spot the subtle sign that someone else had made the way safe for me. Now, here's the other thing I always found interesting about road salt. After I got back to my dorm, I would take my snow boots off. And I learned quickly that I had to store my boots in the shower until the next morning because the snow and ice would eventually melt all over my floor, sadly, but the salt would remain. And I woke to sparkling crystals all over my floor and later my shower, which made me smile. It was a reminder that something had kept me safe and allowed me to come home. Now, there are multiple ways for us to stay safe, multiple ways for us to keep others safe. And sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes we're the sandbags. Sometimes we're there to be the barrier between the rushing water and the people who need our help. We can't stop all the water from coming in, but we can fill the gap and protect them from the worst of it. It means being visible. It means working with others to provide that safety. We cannot do this work alone. It takes many of us interlocking and joining together, much like how sandbags are stacked to hold back the flow. Now, this type of work isn't for everyone, and that type of visibility isn't for everyone, and that's okay. There is more than enough work for all of us. Some of us may need to be more like road salt, quietly making the way safe for others, glistening softly in a way that highlights a safe path for others to traverse, hanging around even after the thread is gone, providing a bit of beauty and peace along with the safety. And some of us may be the ones who need the support and safety that only a beloved community such as this can provide. In this upcoming week, as we have yet another storm raging in the Gulf heading our way, I encourage you to look around you and see where you can be a sandbag or a handful of road salt to provide safety and security for those who will need it. Sadly, our work is not done, But much like the process of filling sandbags, we cannot do this alone. Let us work together to create the world we wish to see. Together. May it be so. Amen, and blessed be.